Hi, it's Lisan. In this video, I'd like to talk about Jimmy Moore. So if you don't know who Jimmy Moore is, he is the author of Keto Clarity and Cholesterol Clarity. He's got a blog called Livin' La Vida Low Carb, and he follows a low carb diet himself, and he's been known to eat sticks of butter and eggs for breakfast. So I'd like to just make a video sharing the things I found about him and some advice as well. So I was Googling, why is Jimmy Moore still fat? And I found a few things, and one of the first things that I found was this article that was promoting the benefits of a low carb diet, and it was giving the example of Jimmy Moore, who had lost 180 pounds on a low carb diet, and it was talking about the benefits of a low carb diet. And I didn't really agree with it because it was only showing one side of the story, how he lost 180 pounds, but it didn't go into him regaining weight. And I was looking up on YouTube some videos about him. I found one by Veg Source that goes a little bit into his weight gain and his weight loss and then his weight gain again. So obviously Jimmy Moore's diet isn't working for him, because if it was working, he would be able to just stay on it long term. I also found another video. It wasn't a vegan video, it was a video by a primal show, but they were criticizing Jimmy Moore.
And this is a current picture at Paleo FX in 2014. Yeah. He has gone on a paleo ketogenic rampage, and it's gotten to the point where he's consuming so many calories, more calories than his body can possibly process, where that extra calorie amount is being stored as fat.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing we've talked about too, is getting your information from the wrong people. You know, he talks about ketogenic diet and uses ketogenic everywhere, and he's misusing the actual name. Ketogenic doesn't mean in consuming large volumes of saturated fat or fats. Done in proportion, done the right way, you will be ketogenic.
So one of the things that the primal show was talking about was that Jimmy was basically gaining weight because he was eating too many calories. For example, for breakfast, he would have 5 eggs a day and a stick of butter, and that would be a regular occurrence. And because his breakfast was so many calories, like over 1,000 calories, that is why he was gaining weight. And so it's because he was overeating on a low carb diet. If we go by that, then it's pretty reasonable to say that's the reason that Jimmy gained weight on a low carb diet. But I don't think that reducing the amount of calories is the answer. I think the answer is finding an alternative for where those calories are coming from. So with science backing me up, I say that instead of getting your calories from fat, get them from carbohydrates, especially from whole plant foods. And I actually found an interview with Jimmy Moore and Durian Rider they did a few years ago, and Jimmy was interviewing Durian Rider on his podcast, and Durian Rider had very good points to make.
I'm sure even you will acknowledge that there are some people who, when they eat a lot of carbs, they actually gain weight. Why do you think this happens?
Yeah, I mean, because their definition of carbs is donuts or pastry or meat lovers pizza or, you know, cheese and chips and deep fried carbohydrate foods. My definition of carbs is like fruits and vegetables and, say, whole grains, you know, the rice. Even though I'm not a rice eater myself, I do promote rice. I just prefer fruit because I find fruit works better for my digestion, having a history of Crohn's disease. So I'm a big fruit eater. But, I mean, I've got friends and they say, oh, but carbs make me fat. And I'm like, okay, let's go back to your house. Or maybe we're at their house. And I say, well, let's open the fridge. And I said, you show me what carbohydrate foods you think are making you fat. And they pull out the chocolate. They pull out the donuts. They pull out their ice cream. They pull out the meat lovers pizza. And I'll say, well, do you realize these carbohydrate foods are 50% calories coming from fat? And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, yeah. And I said, well, how about you have a vegetarian cheese-free pizza? They're like, oh, that would taste disgusting. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's why you don't eat it. Because if you did eat vegetarian cheeseless pizza, you wouldn't be as big as you are. Once you give them a vegan pizza, they're like, wow, this is pretty good. or once you give them some good fruit or a good fruit smoothie, they're like, wow, this is pretty good.
Jimmy has also recently talked about LDL cholesterol and how large LDL particles aren't as atherogenic as small LDL particles.
Number 3 is failing to understand the varying LDL subparticles. But if you have those cholesterol levels like we were just talking about with the HDL over 1.8 and the triglycerides under 1.8, you're probably going to have mostly those large fluffy kind of LDL particles. The problem that comes into play is the very small, dense, BB-sized LDL particles, and those are indicative of a high carb diet with very high triglycerides and very low HDL cholesterol.
But that's only telling part of the story. LDL basically should be as low as possible, whether big or small. And if you have a look at these studies, this study shows that in men, there was a 31% increased risk of cardiovascular disease for large LDL particles instead of 44% for small LDL particles. So there's still that risk there. In fact, for larger LDL particles, a more cholesterol-rich LDL particle deposits more cholesterol in the artery wall, and from this perspective may be considered more atherogenic than a cholesterol-poor particle.
My cholesterol came in really high during the writing of Cholesterol Clarity, and I just had them run again, and in American terms, the numbers dropped triple digits. So it went from something like almost 400 total cholesterol to now 289. I've not seen a 2 in front of my cholesterol number in almost a decade.
With Jimmy's cholesterol at 289, that is still very high risk, and if he wants to lower his cholesterol further, I recommend that he goes on a totally plant-based diet. Cut out the butter, cut out the eggs. If you don't have those sources of animal protein and animal fat in your diet, your cholesterol will get lower. Get your calories from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. You can include nuts and seeds if you want. Just keep them to a limit if you're at risk of heart disease. Get out of the ketogenic state and carb up. See you in my next video. Bye.